Hi folks, and welcome to another guide. What we're going to be looking at today is trade within the game itself. Right now I'm in July 31st, 1943, and it is the German turn, or Axis turn here. And what I want to do in this part is I just want to take a look at the trade routes and taking a look at the map and how they deal with the trade routes, and also from either side what you need to be careful of or what changes depending on the weather itself. So let's start off by actually clicking on the trade route button. So if you look at the menus on the top here, there's a trades convoy route there that you can actually click on. And what it does is it highlights all the routes, that is Allies and Axis, and it shows you the path traveled by, and as I'm scrolling through here, it shows you the traffic and the travel path of the resources that you have for the Allies and the Axis. Now the difference is when you're on the Axis turn and you move your cursor over the position itself, what ends up happening is it will display the amount of resources that are passing through there. And for the Axis, when you look at the Arctic Lend-Lease, it doesn't transport any resources through that for the Axes themselves. But if you take a look at these routes over here and you place your mouse cursor on one of them, you will see that 27 resources are going through the Baltic route here, and you can see the different portions of the Baltic route. So when you place your mouse cursor over this line here, it tells you which is the route. So you can see the Baltic route here then changes to the actual Nordic iron ore route. And because we're looking at resources being traveled here, you can see that from Finland, Germany gets one resource from this particular location that will travel along this route here and end up going to Stettin out of all of it. Also, when you take a look at other routes and so forth and information, when I put here, it looks like there's 27 resources that are flowing through here. And how would I find out what are the resources that are flowing through these trade routes? Well, there is on the, if when you look at the top again, closer to the left side, there is actually a convoys icon up there, which shows you all the different routes or all the different convoys that are taking place here. Now with Germany, what you need to realize that is certain routes are going to be open, and the way you can tell that a route is opening for shipping is you get these icons here. So you can see the Nordic iron ore route for Germany is open, and the Baltic route is also open to transport resources to Stettin through shipping of some sort. Now all the resources that are going to Germany, so for example from Bulgaria, Romania and Hungary, they don't come through any kind of waterway here. So what ends up happening is you can see here when we're looking at Romania and Hungary and so forth, that ends up traveling its resources through rail, and when you put your cursor over there, there's no information that's provided with that. That's just understood that as long as those routes are not interrupted for whatever reasons, partisan attacks or so forth, that resources will be transported to Berlin and distributed properly within the production screen, whether it be oil and so forth down the line here. So when I take a look at my resources here for Germany itself, I see that 25 resources are coming from Sweden. So looking up at Sweden here and realizing these are the summer months, keep that in mind, I'm dealing with the summer months here. It seems that the resources, and this is the capital resources, so what they're doing is the iron ore here is being brought to the capital, and then from the capital it's rail to Leilu, and then what ends up happening is it gets transported down all the way to Germany into Stettin there. So when I take a look at that and see the resources here, and again if we look at the bottom portion of my screen here, you can see that the 25 resources from Sweden are coming through this line. So this is 25 resources here that I'm getting. Notice here, if I again escape and take a look at Finland here, this is transporting 2 resources. So when I look at Finland here, Finland's transporting 2 resources, so 25, that's 2 here coming across this way. And then when they join up and link at this particular point, I can bring my cursor over here and see that there are 27 resources that are being transported along this lane down to Stettin there, and you can see now the 27 becomes 28 as you add the 1 from Finland out of all of it. So those resources there have to go across water, and because they go across water, what ends up happening is they require merchant shipping here. So as you can see right here, to travel or to transport those 28 resources out of all of it, 28 merchant marines have to be used to, or merchant shipping have to be used to actually transport that. And we can see that in the production screen. If you go back to the trade window out of all of it, it will tell you that there are 27 available for use for a new creation if we need to use the waterway. We have 27 merchant marines that are just sitting around and not being used at this particular time. So again, when you go back to the production screen here, you can see of the 55 merchant marines that Germany has, there are 28 in use. That means that there are 27 available for you to actually create other convoys and transport resources from that. Now keep in mind, if you go beyond this number here, what ends up happening is those resources are just not transported. And if your number ever falls, so if you notice 00 here, and when you go to the production screen, let's say you only have 25 merchant marines and you're going to see in use 25, that means 3 resources are not transported, they're lost, because you don't have enough merchant marines to be able to transport that information or that resource to Germany to be used for other things. So when we take a look at the production screen from Germany, its production screen, the resources that I'm getting that are imported, and again when I'm looking at this, I mean, I can add up just the production resources, but it's easier just to do oil. You can see Romania is giving 40 oil here to Germany. So that's on a 1-to-1 basis. So that means Germany itself is making about 35 oil on its own based off of the resources it has in Germany itself. But it's getting 40 from Romania here, which makes up the 75. So you've got like 35 plus 40, which 40 of the oil is being imported to Germany so that it can support its army out of all it. The same happens with regard to resources. The base resource of Germany is 170. And when I take a look at the resources here that are brought into the country, it looks like I got 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So 50 resources are being brought into the country. 50 times 2.13 here, so it's over 100 extra resources are being imported from Germany. So when we take a look at trade itself and pushing on the trade icon button, remember that was on the top there. It looks like the little ships there. It's a little toggle. You can also push the T key on your keyboard and it will also toggle trade for you. We can see that Germany itself has a portion of its resources that are traveling over water. Now, something to make note of. This is an Arctic region weather-wise, so what ends up happening in the wintertime, Helsinki and Leilu will, or Lule will end up freezing, and as a result what will end up happening is I can't, unless I take Leningrad and open up a rail unit towards Helsinki here, I won't be able to transport resources into Helsinki, and it will not be able to transport resources out of it. When Lule freezes over, what ends up happening is the Nordic iron ore route kicks into play, and what will happen is as long as Germany controls Narvik here, what will end up happening is the resources from Sweden will be transported down along the coast of Finland onto the Baltic route into Stettin. So keep that in mind. When Lule freezes over, the resources, the iron ore resources, will flow along the coast. If the Allies block this in any sort of way, this is a protected convoy route, but if they capture any hex within the route itself, or in particular Narvik, that flow of resources, that's 25 resources per turn, will stop going to Germany until the summer months, and again the summer route can be opened up. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, These are escorts to be able to protect our route against sub-attacks, aircraft attacks, and so forth. Actually, I take it back, not aircraft attacks, sub-attacks. So Germany has Nordic iron route that's protected, so I don't have to provide any escorts for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up all the escorts here. You need a maximum of 10 escorts to be able to protect the lane completely against sub-attacks. So this will provide all the protection I require for the Baltic route. I may have to buy more escorts as time progresses, but this will protect that route. If you don't have 10, then it's based off of a ratio. When we go to Italy, we see that it has iron ore here. And when I'm looking at the iron ore, it's from its own ownership. And it looks like it only has one route, so I'm going to put it and protect that route from sub-attacks. And when I'm looking at the iron ore, where it's really coming from is hex 15230 here. Here's the iron ore. When I push the trade button here, you can see it starts off with the iron ore here, and it goes to Cagliari, and then from Cagliari it goes to Naples, then over to Rome, where it can be utilized for its purposes for production. So it uses the Mediterranean route, so when you go to the convoy thing, you can see here when I go to Italy, what's highlighted is the Mediterranean route. Now, since it's only using the Mediterranean route, I do have the option if I want, which has no impact. You can leave them on if you want, or you can turn them off. To turn off a route, that is to prevent, let's say, a possible attack to that route, because you know that enemy subs are within the area and you don't want resources to flow through that route. To turn off a route, all you have to do is click on it. You can see the route is now turned off. To activate it again, you just have to click on it. So because I only have one active route really here, what I can do is, if I just want to emphasize that to myself, I can shut down all the other routes, and then I don't have to worry about it per se. And then I have a little bit more control. But I can see from this icon right here that this is the only active convoy route for Italy at this point in time. So when we're looking at this from a standpoint of travel, we can see that Sweden here will either start off at Luleå or Narvik. Sorry for the pronunciation, folks. So if it's non-blizzard, it will start off at Luleå and follow the Baltic route into Stettin. But if it's a blizzard, then the iron ore will go to Narvik, and from Narvik it'll leave the Nordic iron ore route to the Baltic to Stettin and travel, or at least deliver 25 resources. Now there's 3 rules that you need to remember when you're dealing with convoys themselves. The country that's importing the actual resources has to provide the merchant marines. If they don't have enough merchant marines, then it goes to the country that's exporting them. That's what they'll try first, or any really allied country after that. If you're dealing with a minor country that requires merchant marines, like for example Finland, well, Finland will use Germany's merchant shipping to be able to handle any kind of flow of resources from that. And you can see here when I'm looking at Bulgaria, I've got where the hex that it actually started from, that is, and then that the resources were railed to actually Berlin, and because of that I don't require any merchant marines to be able to do that. Italy itself, that owns its resources, really only has the 5 here, and that follows the Mediterranean route and so forth down the line. Now moving forward within the turn itself, and again this is only part 1. I'm not going to do attacking the routes today. I'm going to leave that as a part 2. I do have it set up for an attack as it stands right now. What I want to do is I want to take a look at the British and see how their routes are set up and so forth. And as you can see, the majority of things that I've mentioned to you still holds into play with regard to how to find how resources are traveled along the trade routes and the shipping that's involved out of all of this. Well, some of the things that you have to realize too, like Italy, Britain gets all its resources, oil resources in particular, being imported. So you can see the importance of being able to protect the lanes and so forth down the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the convoys here, and I'm just going to first assign the unassigned escorts to protect my lanes. Lanes that are paramount to protect are the North Atlantic lane from the point of view of the UK. The South Atlantic lane is really important too, because again, when we look at 1943, Germany can use France to attack the South Atlantic lane here. So you want to make sure you have over 10 escorts in those particular lanes. The African coast starts down here when you take a look at it. So just to zoom in a bit here and move over, so you can see the African coast starts here and then jumps all the way the map over to the other side here, and then comes around here when we're dealing with resources here. It's also really good to know the names of the resources, the trade routes, because it really helps you be able to locate them. For example, this is the Caribbean route, and if you're never sure and you can't remember them, all you have to do is place your mouse cursor over the route itself, click the trade convoy thing, and you can see the line, and you can see this is the Pan American route, and then the Pan American route turns into the North Atlantic route, which brings it all the way into Liverpool, which is also the North Atlantic route. And you can see a crisscrossing of routes here. Here's the South Atlantic, the North Atlantic, and the Arctic Lend-Lease that goes to Russia, in particular the two port cities of Murmansk, or in more particularly, which is used more often in this game, Arkhangelsk, where the resources end up going in. So just like before, when I'm looking at the trade routes here, if I want to know the number of resources that are going in here, I have 162 resources that are entering and leaving Liverpool. I can see this from the bottom portion of the screen when I place my mouse cursor on the trade hex there. So I've got 162 resources, and that's either imports or exports. Okay, so going to the trade screen here and getting into a little bit more detail. So I'm gonna again protect the South Atlantic more, and African coast more, because those are the ones that from the British point of view I'd like to protect. I want to help the Americans protect these ones too, because I have oil resources, but I'm hoping America will do most of that. And South Atlantic, sorry, hit the wrong way, and African. Good. Okay. So let's just look at the UK here. South America is bringing 5 and 30 oil resources. So when I move over here and I see that route is down here, it's transporting 65. But I just said that for Britain it's 5 and 30, which is 35. But yet it's transporting 65. Where's the other 30 coming from? Well, it turns out that the other 30 is coming from the US. So 30 oil is also being transported up here, and what ends up happening is that 30 oil to the US, it comes up here and then goes to Washington. How do I know that? Well, when I put my mouse cursor over there, I can see that 30 resources have been exited out. And when I check above it, I can see that only 35 resources are being transported in this portion of the convoy lane. And that's the British resources that have to go all the way up, all along the American coast, all the way into the North Atlantic, and then end up being in Liverpool out of all of it. So you can see what ends up happening is that when we're looking at the trade route aspect of it, all the resources can be traced by placing your mouse cursor over the different portions of the route, especially near where the routes are exiting out. So here's Canada here. When I take a look at this, it's providing 22 resources that I'm getting out of here. So when I'm looking at Canada here, I can see that it's, when I go to add these up, I'm getting 22 resources that are being transferred from Canada. So this is how I go about checking to see how this works. I usually go where the resources are coming in and out. When I take a look at this, it looks like I'm getting 41 resources. Well, when I'm looking at imports and exports, what I need to do also is I need to take a look at what's happening. So if I'm looking at this, I can see it's exporting 10 to the UK, 30 to the Soviet Union, and it's getting one imports. That's the green arrow that's pointing towards the left, and you can always place your mouse cursor over, and it's got these little helpful fly-ups that tell you what it's used for. So you can see the 41 resources here. One is going in, and 40 of them are going out to the different countries, and they can be checked. So again, just kind of speeding things up here, I'm just going to assign different routes here, or different, and I'm going to protect this a little bit more, so forth down the line. And Russia, I'm going to do the Arctic Lend-Lease. I'm not going to worry about the North Atlantic. I'm going to let the British and the Americans deal with that. Okay, so you can see here with Russia, Russia is getting imports from the US. It's getting 30 resources, which again, when multiplied by 1.75 here, adds to the production of the Russian, 1.53 adds to the production of the Russians here. That's the idea that the resources do. Oil, there is no multiplier that's affecting. It's straightforward. So Russia itself produces a base of 85 oil, so it's not importing any oil out of all this. Notice in the States, what ends up happening is it's 190, but when I take a look at what the America actually produces, it's 40 plus 40 plus 40 plus 40 plus 40, that's 160. And remember, 30 of that oil is being imported, and because it's being imported, that's why America's getting 190 oil resources, 30 being from imports itself, from the Allied Central and South American resource routes out of all of it. So let's take a look at the British now and see that they're getting from South America, they're getting an import from the US, and we know that that import from the US leaves New York, goes on the Pan American route, then it goes to the actual North Atlantic route and takes it all the way into Liverpool from there. But let's take a look at Persia. Now, some of the routes, whether they be by conquest or are allied, have this little green arrow here. And I didn't bring it up before, but now's a good time to actually bring it up as we see the routes themselves. What ends up happening is if I go to that, it'll tell me the resources here, and I'm getting, it looks like 30 oil from Persia that's coming down the African coast. But as I move here, you can see in the bottom, what I want you to do is also notice what's happening on the bottom left of my screen here. As I move along this line here and I get to the end, it jumps up to 95. What's happening here? Well, it turns out that the Allied Pacific resources that are here are being transported to this particular hex also here. So the Persian 30 oil plus the resources here, which are 65 resources, are then connected at this portion. And then what happens is if we move all the way over to the other side of the map, you can see the trade route continues in this particular location here and then moves up to, so this is the African, it goes to the South Atlantic, which then connects with the North Atlantic, which brings it into Liverpool. Now, what's interesting to note as we're going through this, and I just want to zoom in here, normally what ends up happening, and I'm happy this has kind of happened within the guide itself, normally resource-wise, this oil here has to also go through this convoy route, but it's not being delivered at this point in time. And the question becomes, why is it not being delivered? So I'm going to click on supply here, and we can see why these 3 oils, which normally would have been delivered by the convoy route, are not being delivered. It turns out that partisans can block the route itself. So what happens is, because I have partisan activity here, this oil from Iraq is being cut off and not being transported from here and connected into the African route. So normally what ends up happening is England would get 15 more oil, but because of partisan activity here, that 15 oil this turn is lost. It may be available next turn once these repair, but at this point in time you can see by turning on supply and also the trade route, we can see that those routes have not been activated, and that 15 oil is actually lost this turn for the British or the UK. So you have to worry about what happens to not only sub-attacks, whether or not partisans themselves affect any kind of resources that flow in. So if I'm looking at 162 resources here, it's really down 15 oil. So this should have been 177 resources flowing through and in England. So going back into England here, I can see that it's 15 oil short, which hurts because it gets all its oil from import. When you take a look at England and the resources that it actually creates, so I'm going to turn off the units here, I can see that England has all brown circles, but there's no oil circles. So it has 55 because one of the hexes turns out to be in Canada here that belongs to the UK, but it has all brown circles to help with production, but there are no oil centers for England, so it has to import them all. So losing 15 to the partisans actually hurts in this particular turn that I'm dealing with. So overall, when I take a look at the lay of the land here, in particular with England, in this particular picture it only had 2 Iraq when I took this one here. You can see that the way it travels from the Caribbean Sea, Pan American Zone, North Atlantic, and ends up being in Liverpool. So Liverpool is for the English is a very important center for resources being imported and exported. Now what happens if you capture Liverpool? Well, on the map itself, there are other convoy routes attached to ports, as I'll show you in a second. So it will just shift its resources unless you capture all of them from there. So you can see here how the actual resources travel. This is the US and the way it would normally travel. So we have from New York, Pan American Zone, North Atlantic, Arctic Lend-Lease. It used to be the Soviet Union Arctic Lend-Lease, but it's changed now. It's just the Arctic Lend-Lease that ends up going to Archangelisk. And notice here I put down that Russia has to provide the merchant shipping, and the reason being is they're importing. So whenever they're the ones that are actually importing, so the country here, the US, is importing from South America, so they have to provide the 30 merchant marines to be able to do that. And what I've just done for myself here is just to get a better understanding here is to take a look at the different screens themselves and see the routes that they travel. Now that's not to say that it's always these routes, because sometimes the game will adjust it to, if one route is blocked, it might jump and try to transfer the actual resources through a different route. But you can check that out, like I mentioned before, by clicking on the trade button, or actually the T key on your keyboard that toggles the trade button on and off out of all of it. So this is the basics of trade and how they work, how to protect trade from this point of view. As I mentioned before, you assign escorts them to protect them from submarine attacks. The sub attacks, or I should say the escorts, will cause damage to the subs, and the more damage you cause to the sub, the less attacks you're going to have to deal with out of all of them. Convoy routes can be tracked simply by following where they start and where they end up, and placing your cursor over the trade route, looking at the bottom left of the screen, tells you how many resources are actually traveling along that route. It's not the same for rail, and as I mentioned before, you don't see anything. You just see the connection of rail to the capital itself, but it doesn't tell you how many resources are actually flowing through there. Now, as I mentioned before, Liverpool is a big important port, because what ends up happening is it's importing and exporting a lot of resources. But you can see here Cardiff is also one, but right now it's not being used. Glasgow is another one, and again it's not being used. And I have Malag here, which is also not being used. So what happens if you capture Liverpool and probably Cardiff, because you're coming up in this way? Well, Glasgow is going to kick in. The same with the US. When you take a look at the US, it turns out that Boston is not being used, but it has a trade route associated with it. So if Washington D.C. falls and New York falls, Boston will kick into play. In fact, Boston will become the new capital of the U.S. if New York and Washington D.C. are captured for whatever reason. Quebec is the main one for Canada out of all of it, and if that gets taken, you can see there's another route for Halifax. So there are backup routes built in to the Allies, and even the German ones. So you can see in Russia here that the other route that's not active at this point in time goes to Murmansk. There are backup routes, so if you capture one of them, you can use the other one. And if you capture both of them, well, then you're out of luck out of all of this, because it turns out that you won't be able to transport resources by sea because those convoy routes are gone out of all of them. So you notice here it's Königsberg here for the Germans. That's a backup for Stettin. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. And as you can see, Italy here has Taranto, and Trieste out of all of them as backups. And certain routes are only activated during certain times. Now I want to go back to Iraq here, so I'm going to have to move a couple turns ahead. I just turned off the route here, so just to make things quicker here, I'm not going to do much of anything within the turn itself. I want to just hopefully activate the oil route here to show you exactly that the partisans affected the particular route to England here. So I'm going to just go back and show that the route shows up. At least fingers crossed that it will in this particular situation. It was good that it actually was broken. So when I take a look at England here, now it's even, again, Iraq has not shown up here. So let's take a look at the lay of the land. Looks like I've even lost Persia out of all of this. So now let's check out here. So partisans have destroyed this part of the rail, which has affected that. And it looks like I've lost Persia. But I'm not sure why I've lost Persia out of all of this. This is 65 resources, but Persia here, when I follow the route, has not been impacted, yet I seem to have lost Persia out of all of it. Let's move forward 2 turns. Again, I want to go back to the UK turn out of all of it. Let's turn on trade. And you can see Persia's now back. I'm just wondering whether or not the partisan attack on the port here affected it, but it shouldn't have from what I could see, because I see the connection of the 30 resources is here, so I'm at a loss at why that one actually disappeared. You can see here the partisan activity is just killing the Iraq route here. It's just not giving it to me at all. And I can see up here I still have not received it, but I've gotten Persia back. I'm going to try one more time to see if I can get it to go. Hopefully there won't be any partisans that will destroy the route. Okay, let's go to Persia. Oh, it looks like I've lost the Persian route again also out of all of it. Yeah, I'm only getting the Pacific route, and again these 2 hexes being destroyed by partisans, and this hex being destroyed, so I can't go to the capital. I've lost the Persian and the Iraq route here. So it looks like what ends up happening is I'm going to have to keep troops in this location so that I can keep the oil flowing and so forth. This was the Europe 1943 scenario, and again this is actually very good that this is happening, because I can show you why this isn't being this is not creating the actual route I require. And you can see I've activated the toggle with regard to trade, and these partisan activities here have shut down the Persian and the Iraq oil out of all of it. So something from the UK point of view to be aware of. I've never had it happen so many times on so many turns before. It's interesting that that it seems to be occurring, well, at least 2 turns in a row out of all of it. So it looks like in this particular situation I'm now getting 2 Iraq oil, but because of this hex here from a partisan activity, it looks like I lost the Persian oil out of all of it. So now when I go to the trade route, we can see I've got the 2 Iraq here, but I've lost the Persian oil out of all of it. And you can see when I go into the production screen here, which is the interesting note, and I've mentioned this as possibly a bug, that the Persian oil is being delivered. So I'm getting, remember that England is importing all its oil out of all of it. So right now it's getting 30, 40, 45 oil, but when I look at it, it's actually getting 75 oil. So in this particular case here, this shouldn't have been delivered because of the blockade. You can see that I'm only getting 10 resources sent here, and it doesn't look like that I'm getting resources transported up any other way. Let's see if Russia's now transporting them over here. Nope, because it's still only 30. So it's interesting that it's still getting 75 when it should be only getting 45 out of all of it. So something I pointed out to the designer Alvaro, and I'm glad I videotaped this because I'm going to send them a copy of this videotape where you can see that the partisans have blocked the Persian oil, yet it's still being delivered. And in one particular case, what ended up happening is it wasn't blocked, and it wasn't delivered. Okay, so just some things to keep in mind with regard to the basics of trade. Hopefully this this guide has helped you, and thank you again everybody for watching. Take care, stay safe.